if you look at the story step by step as to what actually happened, you come away with not the image of a loving creator God. You come away with this concept of an omniscient God who conspired to completely set up the fall. I mean, putting Adam and Eve in a garden and posting a tree there and saying, "Don't eat that," is kind of like putting a toddler in a crib with a loaded gun. And then when they shoot, when they shoot their leg off, now in addition to missing a leg, you're going to beat them, weekly. Once a week, I'm just going to beat you because you shot that gun. That's kind of the way that original sin and punishment for that comes. But the thing that the Gnostics pointed out, and others have as well, is that if you look at the story, you've got God telling them, "Don't eat that fruit on the day you eat it, you will surely die." And then you have the serpent, who later is recast as Satan. But there's a lot of other stories in Babylonian myths and things that are similar, so it's not quite so clear. But he comes along and says, "That's not true. You're not going to die when you eat that. You're going to learn. You're going to have knowledge. You're going to have the knowledge of the gods, and he doesn't want you to have that." And what happens is they eat the fruit, they get the knowledge, and they don't die. So you have the serpent there who's actually telling them the truth.
Right.
And God's the one that lied to them.
So they have to go back and backfill it, rationalize it, say, "Oh, well, that was really,
a spiritual death."
Spiritual death.
Yeah. They were immortal before that.
Yeah. They meant something else. You see this whole idea of original sin showing up in Pope John Paul after the 9/11 attack talked about how the 9/11 attack was blamed on humanity, right? He blamed humanity for the evil of this attack. He didn't blame blind faith. He didn't blame the worship of a mass murdering God. He didn't blame the religious institutions that had indoctrinate in belief of glorious afterlife. He didn't blame murder for the cause of moral purity. He didn't blame martyrdom. He didn't blame Islam. He blamed humanity. He blamed if you're anti-abortion, he blamed the unborn babies. And that's who he blames. So
you're talking about the Pope?
I'm talking about the Pope, John Paul.
Yeah, he wasn't the only one who did that. Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell did the same thing.
Okay.
Falwell was on Robertson's show and made the outrageous statement that the 9/11 attacks were the result of abortionists, atheists, ACLU, anything that he doesn't agree with is what caused 9/11.
Right.
And Pat Robertson, being mostly senile in my opinion by this time, just sits there and nods his head. Yeah, absolutely, praise the Lord. And of course, they both ended up having to submit a kind of half-baked apology.
Right.
I think kind of Pat Robertson's the king of half-baked apologies we've been seeing lately.
Well, and one of their shticks is that they're blaming people who they think are taking us away from God, right?
Right.
And it's a little bit different concept than sin. It's sort of the secularists, us evil people.
Well, by their thing, we are all the devil's tools. We are sinners, and we are deceived in our sin, and we're trying to convince everybody else to sin as well. We are the tempters.
Are we? Okay.
Fear us.
Okay.
So, I mean, you've got this confusing doctrine which allows them to say, well, innocent babies, they're really innocent, which is how the Catholics came up with limbo.
Right.
And now they've done away with it.
Right.
They're responsible for more harm to infant souls than anybody ever.
That's right, taking away that limbo.
Hey, here's some limbo for you. Yeah.
Let's see, if sin is part of human nature, then the Creator is responsible, So you sort of can't have it both ways. So
there's a little bit of a problem of evil aspect in there, which is something, without actually doing the whole problem of evil argument, if you have the idea of an omniscient and omnipotent creator, so I can create, if I'm this creator, I can create any universe I want with any rules that I want, and I know ahead of time what all the results are going to be.
Right.
That means that this particular God, with those qualities, specifically created this universe, knowing in advance everything that would ever happen. And because he had options, that means he specifically created a world where Adam and Eve sinned and did the fall for man. And also that means he has handpicked who's going to be saved at the end and who's not. because he had other options available to him and didn't choose them. And that's where Calvin and the others get this predetermination and
Sure.
predestination.
Sure. So to be real clear, I mean, Adam or God could have created this garden, if it existed at all, without this tree, right? He could have put the tree outside the garden. And that would have been a better situation according to this story, right? Because then there would be no evil in the world, right? Supposedly. I think the free will question is kind of interesting. Did Adam have a free will? Did they have a free will? Well, maybe they did, but they didn't have the knowledge to make intelligent decisions.
Yeah.
So free will is like useless without knowledge, right?
It's like, and I don't mean to just be crude, but this is a good example. If you have an infant who's constantly wetting their pants, and they're not of an age where they can have a proper understanding of, and I'm not saying that that's evil. I mean, this is just a behavioral thing, but they don't understand that what they're doing is wrong as far as you're concerned. How can you possibly justify punishing them for that? If Adam and Eve didn't have knowledge of good and evil until after they ate the tree, then you can't possibly hold them responsible for eating the tree that they didn't realize was actually bad.
Right.
There's a good chance that most of this is just
okay. So we have this original sin problem, this horrible problem that has to be solved somehow. So how do we solve it? We bring Jesus into the picture. It's my understanding that the whole concept of original sin doesn't exist in the Old Testament at all.
Right.
And that it was actually glommed on to this Jesus story as a justification for this sacrifice thing, right? Right.
That's so when the devil was reworked as the serpent.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. So we have this sacrifice meme, this unjust punishment meme, right? That is very powerful. I mean, everybody can relate to being punished unjustly, right? That is a very powerful notion, and so you have to, and this thing is kept taking hold. And how do you justify it? Well, you have to backfill and say, well, this relates back to this fall of mankind that didn't really exist until much later, when you're trying to use it as a rationalization.
It kind of depends. I mean, on the one hand, there are verses in the Old Testament that talk about the sins of the father being passed on. So maybe original sin might not necessarily have been. You would really need to speak to a rabbi to talk to what conventional Judaism says about this kind of thing.
Okay.
Since that's primarily their book. But there was some concept of sin and how it entered the world through the story, even if it doesn't imply that everybody is automatically sinful at birth.
God has to have this blood sacrifice for this earlier problem that he created. And why do you have to have a blood sacrifice? Who's making up the rules? Well, right. God is. And it's all just,
it's really absurd.
It just doesn't make any sense.
There was a guy,
you have all this drama going on in explanation of nothing.
I'm going to sacrifice myself to myself to satisfy rules that I wrote. Boy, that's a good idea.
Yep. So that's what a devious design.
I think you're getting ready to get to it. So
yeah. So did Jesus even suffer? Well, he became a god, or he was a god to begin with. So is there really any sacrifice at all? But the real problem here is you can't transfer a moral debt. Right?
But God can. That's the explanation. I don't mean to rain on your parade, but being a former Christian...
You are raining on my parade.
Being a former Christian, God can do this.
Oh, yeah, he can.
That's how he got away with it. The interesting thing is that there's an idea within Christianity, which somebody presented to me a couple weeks ago, because we spoke a lot about Jesus, and that's that when you were talking about did Jesus actually suffer? Because my thinking is, of course, if you willingly sacrifice yourself, knowing without any doubt that you're going to be raised up again in 3 days and live forever in heaven, and oh, by the way, I am God. What kind of sacrifice is that really? And then how do you explain Jesus' dying words of why hast thou forsaken me? And the guy said that basically God borrowed Jesus and walked around in a Jesus suit for 33 years, and then just before the torture started, because God can't experience pain or suffering.
Oh, he bugged out of there.
He left. So could you imagine that there's this guy who wakes up at the age of 33 and goes, "Hey, what the hell are you guys
doing on here?" No.
People are flaying his skin and
holy crap! Yeah.
I mean, it's just silly.
That's a good one. I hadn't heard that. That's pretty good.
Where do I get my Jesus suit?